Ke rata go thoma ka go le dumedisha. Ke re a lotšha. Molweni. Good afternoon. First, a note of gratitude to those who invited me here today. The Works of Art Committee and the organizers of this really wonderful proceedings this evening. I'd also like to thank those who are presenting offerings here with me today. We stand here on a critical site of history, a charged space. This here, the Sarah Baartman precinct, at this moment that heaves with demand. This time that can be characterized as the interregnum, in which the old is certainly dying and perhaps dead, and the new is yet to be born. Here we do not only face, but feel in our hearts, in our collective bodies, multi-layered histories that continue to imprint us with their unfinished business. The motions of this space that entangle us in tides of violence. And the call of this moment, as we stand in the smoldering ashes, filled with desire to forge something new. On bad days, this haunts us. On good days, we are strengthened. But at all times, we feel this in our guts. I want to speak today about this time, our time. I want to speak to this moment that we are in, confronted by an incredible crisis of imagination, where we are called to imagine a new world, to forge out of this fire of destruction alternative forms of being and knowing, alternative forms of relating to ourselves, to each other, to this living land, alternative forms of embodying our lives and structuring our families and societies. I take these majestic mountains that stand before us as teacher, as guidance, and as model. When these mountains self-immolate, when they call upon themselves the fire of destruction and creation, when they initiate rituals of cleansing in their nature, in their essence and wisdom, they know how to live with fire, how to metabolize fire to bridge next cycles of their own lives that will bring about regeneration, growth, and transformation. When these mountains self-immolate in their destruction, they also express an act of hope upon the future. They release certain spores and seeds that allow the next iteration of themselves, a vision of their future to manifest. The old die, yes, yet there is continuity. And the mountain and the forest teaches us that in this act of breathing hope and prayer in their lifeline in the moment of death. Today I stand here tasked to speak to and of the fire this time. The elders teach me that these times call for questions that matter, for curiosity and inquiry, perhaps more than answers. Perhaps we can collectively process these questions, communally gather around them. What are we leaving behind? What must we leave behind to die in this fire? What needs to be forged moving forward in this fire? What are we taking forward as a burning vision of the next iteration of ourselves? These questions need visionaries. They need radical imaginations, those who are able to see there where we are going before others. But we are in luck, for we stand here to celebrate the field of the imagination in the form of the arts. But we also know that throughout history, fire has been weaponized against others. The fact that fire as a natural force affects everybody is a truth that has to sit alongside another, which is that fire continues to be unequally distributed. Some groups serving for others as a sacrifice to it or a shield against it. To put it simply, for some groups, endings by fire happen many times over, calling for multiple beginnings and multiple emergences in this lifetime. What desires and visions might groups adversely affected by fire hold for this era that is yet to be born? We are brought here by history. We meet as a future memory of those who come before us, who dreamed of the fire next time, the fire this time. The theme of this gathering is based on a letter one James Baldwin wrote to his nephew, a letter he wrote to the future. We are brought here by an intergenerational longing, dreamed up by our predecessors who were dehumanized, criminalized, pathologized, terrorized, and much worse in this space. Can we read or hear, for example, other forms of letters from the past? Sonic letters from the mouths of our ancestors who, like trees on these mountains, issued final prayers from their burning mouths. What dreams, visions, and promises did the bodies that texture the histories of this square hold for this moment? What were their dying wishes? What were the dying wishes of those buried here without headstones or ceremony? What did they mutter under their breath before facing their premature death? What might Sarah Bartman have held in her heart as a dream for us as she was exhibited in public squares of Europe, much like this one architecturally that we are standing in? What might we hear in the wind if we listened deeply? To his nephew, James Baldwin issued a plea to know and never forget he's been loved, to remember to give love while facing inequality in the loveless world of racial inequality. We are brought here by history, and we are brought here by love. This love strengthens and fortifies our spirit. The students who in 1968 met history's demands and stood here in defiance against a loveless regime that would refuse a black, brilliant thinker, Achima Feje, into the corridors of their exalted department and institution. Those students were moved by love. The absolute refusal by students, by us, to subject ourselves to the domineering and perverse gaze of Cecil John Rhodes in our daily quest for our humanity and for education was an act of love. Love for ourselves and the future, fueled by those who've come before us, those who have taught us to love and respect ourselves. Those whom, when they were bent at the stake, breathed into the wind prayers of assurance, our bones will rise again. Those who sang our names, izithakazelo zethu, direto tsa rena, into our ears as love letters to the future, this time, this fire. The fires of our time are stoked and fanned by a deep love from our predecessors, our ancestors who instilled this love as a life-giving force against the death machines we face daily. The roots of our anger is a deep love. The roots of our anger is as deep as the love in our lineages. The death of our ancestors is our lives. Va re phela, o re philele. Vati siphilele. They affirmed their lives and ours with their final breath. I want to speak from this place of their longing, their deep need, their love, and their vision. What spores and seeds did they release for these times? And perhaps more importantly, how do we retrieve those seeds? How do we read those love letters? How do we hear their prayers? In many ways, just like the seeds in this majestic forest, we carry the lifeline and timeline, lived experiences, legacies, and visions of our ancestors in our bodies, in our memories, latent or remembered. If we accept that there is intergenerational trauma encrypted and encoded in our DNA, then we must simultaneously accept that intergenerational wisdoms are similarly enshrined by the same DNA. That the love and life-giving force that makes us refuse the conditions of domination and oppression are memories of the future encoded in us. And this becomes our reference point during these times marked by a crisis of imagination. It would seem to me then that the crossroad at which we find ourselves requires that we take a tally of what we lost in the fire, that we reach into the ashes of that fire to forage and forge from what survives the next iteration of ourselves. These are the things we lost in the fire, also known as a litany of loss. Our land and languages, our calendar and cosmologies, our spiritualities and ceremonies, our mothers and our medicines, our homes and heritage, our food, our familiar, love-led leaders, our dignity and divinity, childhood and enchantment, sacred sites and shrines, and far too many unspeakable and incalculable losses. Some that haunt us in moments of intimacy. We stand in the ashes of the afterburn, remembering that anything we love can be saved. We stand on this land. We stand on this land that, even when stolen, still beats its pulse and sings its stories through our bodies. We have a calling to retrieve this inheritance. What are the potentials of the body and the land in our project of recuperating these heirlooms from the debris and ashes? What unwieldy and ungovernable literacies, rhythms, wisdoms can be harnessed from the body and the land as sites of knowledge? What potentials for recovery? Recovery here in its double meaning of fetching back, retrieving, but also in its second meaning of recovering from trauma, from illness. What potentials for recovery are possible when we return to the body and land, to their cycles and seasons? What systems of knowing and belonging can be forged out of the archive of feeling, of intuition, the dreamscapes, and heart work? What if we take seriously the body and the land as living sites and as our ancestors' memorials for this time, their time, our collective time? Listening to the knowledges of our bodies is necessarily an act of remembering, of retreating maroonage of retreating to our bodies as the first home and as living archives of our deep history. This, in and of itself, is a divestment from white supremacy. Instead of exploiting our bodies as extractable units of capitalist labor, the invitation here is to overturn the violence and embody rituals of return. To move and be moved towards the body as home, even when home has been where we feel hurt the most. To attend to our bodies as libraries, even when raging fires gut and scorch its ventricles and shelves. And when we meet grief there in our bodies, in our land, let us greet it, accept its invitation to slow down, and submit ourselves to the cleansing ritual of salt. Similarly, listening into the wisdom and memories of the land and attuning to its cycles and rhythms, instead of treating the land, our land, as commodity we can auction, as commodity we can extract and loot. Listening to the wisdom and memories of the land becomes itself an act of disloyalty to capitalist patriarchy, a divestment from white supremacy. When we conduct the care work of stitching our hearts, our intuition, our feelings, our dreams back with our minds and our logics, when we do the care work of stitching our feelings and intuitions to our thought processes, our dreams to our imaginations, our bodies to our land, we begin the work of repair. Repairing with a hyphen, the pairing back together, that which has been violently severed into binaries and thereby undermining the totalities of our being. What does care work of stitching look like? Listen deeply and observe the umsebenzi that is coming up later this evening, the discussions that are coming up, and the films that will be screened later on. The discipline of performance holds many possibilities for us. Performance asserts and affirms our interiority, our inner worlds as legitimate sides of knowledge that can impact change and lead to lasting action. The fire of performance is vital and vitalizing in its ability to destroy the binaries between the body and the mind, between nature and culture, between seen and unseen worlds, and the gender binaries. As we gather here today to celebrate this modality and medium of the body as intervention, we are invited to observe the care work of stitching. Performance and embodied art forms process the fire in our systems, in our bodies, in our land, and in our states. State as the nation and state as our collective and individual psychosocial conditions. We no longer sing. We no longer dance. We no longer hold rituals and ceremonies that metabolize the fires of our joys and discontents. What happens to the fires of our disillusionment and betrayal when it is not discharged? It lodges itself in our bodies, in institutional bodies, in the national body, in the body of the land, becoming an indiscriminate menace that kills society. The elders warn of children not kept warm by their community, coming back to burn it down so they may feel its warmth. Institutions of education that willfully speak and teach away and against our lived experiences of ongoing racial trauma, class oppression, homophobia, misogyny, alienation, and dehumanization by its edifices of power. These institutions shall similarly feel our wrath and fire. Like the Sharpeville protests of 2016 that were just here, we will bring the centuries-old indignities heaped upon us on its manicured lawns. As long as fire continues to be unequally distributed, with some groups serving for others as sacrifice to it or shield against it, then our grief too will be asymmetrical. Grieving fires that burn libraries and artworks will inevitably be astounding for those who grieve the burning of their family and kin in shack fires every winter. Those who are seared by the burning flame of poverty's shame. Those who feel every day by the hour that their lives do not matter. I'm talking about Black bodies put on the line for the making of this modernity, this country, this capital, this government, this city, these monuments that taunt us, and the undying history that continues to haunt us. Black bodies have died and continued to die here, to burn in the fires that keep others warm. Kondiswa James, later in the films that we are gonna watch, invites us into a ritual of mourning, saturating the plinth where Rose rested after looting this continent, to ask questions around whose history is recognized as great, whose bodies are seen and venerated, and whose bodies are violated and erased. Grant Jurius's work also attends to the layers of history whitewashed by this city, this cape of bad amnesia. In his work, we encounter the first people of this land, future iterations, their future iteration that release them from shackles of colonial time and history, ever present here and now, like the sun. In their work, Lukhanyiso Skhosana enlists the body to disrupt Christian heteropatriarchal gender binaries, invoking ancestral presence to assert and affirm longer lineages of femme, Black, queer bodies in this land. Lisiba Mabitsela and Lauren Sukul invite us into the unbounded imagination of childhood, the unbounded imagination of childhood games as another framework from which we can fashion otherwise possibilities for existing in this exploitative and extractive paradigm of heteropatriarchal capitalism. When the markets gaslight us into wondering why we are so fatigued, we are reminded to rest and play. Performance artists have been doing the work of ritual cleansing. It would do us well to listen deeply, to witness and be witnessed. Perhaps in their ceremonies, or perhaps their ceremonies might lead us out of forests of forgetfulness, make bearable the burden of history, and attune us to the mission of our generation. I stand here with you today with grief in my heart, but with love too, as faithful companion. I can sense beneath my feet a rumbling of things falling, calling for new things to rise. I listen to the ground to feel the rhythms of its demands, and am happy to learn that my body remembers the song of this land. A charge of history, daring us to be brave, moving us to dream the greatest dream yet. We move, we move. Agobe jwalo. Makwande. Thank you.
Likonite